everybody. So today we are going to be talking about section 3.7, which is on total fertility rate. And throughout this video, I'm going to mostly just reference it as TFR because it's shortened and easier. But remember, TFR stands for total fertility rate. So our learning objective for today is that you can explain factors that affect total fertility rate in human populations. Some of the essential knowledge that you're going to gain is what causes total fertility rate and what has an impact on it, how we have different factors that are going to change infant mortality rates over time, how infant mortality rates are related to total fertility rate, and how it is that governments can have an impact on all of that. And today you're going to have a chance to practice the suggested skill of data analysis, where you will describe patterns or trends in data. So before we start out, there's going to be a few terms that you're going to need to know what they mean. And again, throughout this video, I'm going to reference them as the abbreviated ones. So I would put the abbreviations in here as well. So the first one is going to be total fertility rate, or TFR. And this is the average number of children that a woman in her life in a population will bear throughout her lifetime. And so the higher total fertility rate that we have is going to be higher birth rate, which generally is going to mean a higher population growth rate. And then we also have this term, the replacement level fertility. And this is the TFR that is required to offset the deaths in a population and keep the population size stable. So if you think about these population pyramid diagrams that we have looked at, I want you to keep in mind how total fertility rate is going to be related to that. So if we think about the house shape where it's pretty stable, this is going to be referencing the replacement level fertility. So typically in developed countries, there's going to be about 2.1 is going to be the replacement level fertility in order to basically just have the offspring replace the two parents. Now, this replacement level fertility is going to be higher in less developed countries because we have higher infant mortality. And so you're going to have women creating more babies to make up for the fact that some of these babies are going to be dying before they get to a reproductive age. Which gets us to the third term, which is infant mortality rate, which is abbreviated IMR. And this is going to be the number of deaths of children under a year old per 1,000 people in a population. So we look at it per 1,000 people. And this is going to be higher in less developed countries, and this is because they have lack of access to healthcare, clean water, food, things like that that are definitely going to impact survivorship of infants. Now, typically what we see is that higher infant mortality rate is going to lead to a higher total fertility rate due to the fact that families are having to replace children that have died and that they aren't getting to a reproductive age or an age where they can be helpful to the family. So you might have more babies, but if only half of them survive, that's how we're going to see fertility rate is connected to infant mortality rate, especially in these less developed countries. So if we look at this map here, on the right-hand side with the blue and purples, we're going to see the infant mortality rate. And then on the left, we're going to see the global TFR. And if you notice, the fact where we have higher levels of infant mortality is going to be where we're seeing higher levels of fertility rate. And again, this is because of what I just talked about, where if you're having more of this offspring dying, you're going to have more babies to make up for the fact that not all of them are going to survive. Now, if you look at these two graphs, you can see that over time, the infant mortality rate is decreasing as well as the total fertility rate. And this is because over the past few decades, we have more countries that are becoming more developed. And so because these countries are becoming more developed, they're going to have more access to clean water. They're going to have access to healthcare with things like hospitals, vaccines, vitamins and supplements for the moms and for the babies, and they're going to have more reliable food supply. And all of this is going to lead to a lower infant mortality rate, which then is going to lead to a lower total fertility rate because you have less of those babies dying, so you don't need to have as many of them. And just to make sure you're aware, this is a worldwide graph for both of these. It's talking about the whole world, not just a country. Now, for factors that can affect the TFR, as I've mentioned, development, which is just synonymous with affluence, basically. So the more developed or wealthy nations are going to have lower TFR than less developed nations. And there's a lot of factors that go into this. The first one is more developed countries have more educational access for women. Now, when women are getting more education, they're learning about things like their own reproductive health, how to prevent pregnancies, and how their bodies work. And that is going to lead to potentially less babies being born for unwanted pregnancies or young moms, and things that maybe it was educational barriers were going to be impacting them having children. Now, in addition to educational access, teaching women more about their bodies and pregnancy and babies and stuff, it's also going to give women more economic opportunity because they're going to be finishing high school. They're potentially going to be going to college, and they're going to have the opportunity to get into careers and jobs and not have it just about having kids. Additionally, in these developed areas, you're going to have higher access to family planning education through schools, but also places like Planned Parenthood, more hospitals being around, and you're going to have more access to contraceptives, which contraceptives are going to help with preventing unwanted pregnancies or unintended pregnancies. And then additionally, you're going to have less need for children to provide income through agricultural labor. As we get countries more developed, we tend to see farming becomes less of a common requirement for all the households. And so you're not needing to have a bunch of kids to help with farming on the property where you live. Your main source of income is not just going to be farming. You're going to have the chance to move into careers that are not as needing of agricultural labor with the children. And so people will have less kids because they don't need them to all be working on the farm with them. Additional factors that can affect TFR is going to be government policies. And this can play a huge role in fertility by coercive, forceful, or non-coercive, encouraging policies. An example of this could be through forced or voluntary sterilization, things like vasectomies. Additionally, a decently well-known one is going to be China's one-child policy, which is now a two-child policy. Now, there's some common misconceptions about this child policy. You don't have the government just coming in and stealing kids if you have more than one. However, they put a really heavy tax on families that had more than one child, now more than two children. And so these heavy taxes are going to encourage families to not be having more children than what the limit is going to be requiring. And that's how a government can use these policies to kind of sort of force people into it through things like taxation. Now you have the opposite side where some countries will give tax incentives to have fewer children, or you can even have money be away through microcredits or loans that you can give to women without children to start businesses. And this is an encourager for not having children, but then it also helps to elevate women out of poverty into more career-focused life goals, which can also impact having less children because women are going to be focused on their careers or the jobs that they are having instead of just being at home having a bunch of children. So this graph is going to show over time. On the x-axis, we have the average income. And on the y-axis, we have births per women. And if you look, the higher income that we get, you are going to see it decreasing. So at the higher income, the less children, and the lower income are typically going to have more children. And these are all due to factors that I just talked about, where we have more access to contraceptives and family planning. You have educational opportunities, which are going to require time, leaving less for raising children. And again, that lower infant mortality rate leads to a lower TFR. And this is the trend that we see throughout the world. Now, this graph is going to show us female education, which is on the x-axis. We have the average years of schooling of women in reproductive age. And on the y-axis, we have children per woman. And we see the trend that as education increases, TFR is going to decrease. And these are all due to what I just talked about here. So more education is going to be fewer unplanned pregnancies. More education is going to be more job opportunities for women, which is going to be an alternative to marrying young when you have jobs where you can provide for yourself and you don't need to get married to have someone to provide for you. So this is going to be your FRQ practice for 3.7. I want you to look at this graph of the worldwide TFR, and I want you to identify and discuss 2 of the causes for the trend in worldwide TFR. And that's my apology. Instead of discuss, pretend that it says define there, because that's going to be your TFR vocab word. So identify and describe 2 of the causes for the trend in worldwide total fertility rate. So that's your practice FRQ for 3.7, and those were your notes on total fertility rate.